So first, I want to say that this is all about metacognition. Now, some of you I have history with, I go back, you all know that I'm my undergraduate degree is in classics, and so I'm always thinking about this from kind of a logic point of view. And I don't think everybody should be thinking in a logic point of view, because logic can get very cold, very unengaging. But I think when we think back to the root of it and the root of lines of reasoning, and we have to think about the logic behind all of that. And so the word metacognition, we hear it a lot. We say, oh, it's a metacognitive approach and things like that. It really literally means beyond knowing. Like, it's beyond the way I think. And so we're thinking about thinking. It's the next step in thinking. I've thought about that, and now I want to do some thinking about my thinking. And that's really what it means to teach and understand a line of reasoning. I have to think about the way I think about that subject. I'm going to say that again. To really understand and teach line of reasoning, I have to think about the way I think about that subject. So if I were to be on a podcast or interviewed by the news or whatever as some sort of pundit for a political stance, I'm not going to offer one right now, but if I was, I might make my claim. And then the person interviewing me would like to say, well, help me understand that. Help me understand why how you come to that conclusion. This is what we do with our students when we ask them, when they make a statement in class, or we ask them to form a claim about something. If they're writing an argument passage, or if they're working in the literature course, they're developing an interpretation, which is just an argument that they're going to make about what something means. So I'm being asked to supply the reasons that underlie my claim, and then explain how those reasons all fit together to lead me to the claim. So I'm thinking about my thinking. Here's why this is important for us to think about. Students haven't often been asked to do this. So we're teaching them how to do it. They're learning how to do it as we go. And sometimes we make the mistake. I say we because I still do it. And I know you've probably done it. And if you've not, good for you. Make the mistake of assuming students know how to do that. They know how to explain something, or they know how to go back and find in their mind and find the reasons and articulate those reasons. Or, we'll look at this a little bit more closely later, they make the mistake of assuming that others understand them, and they haven't put it into the paper. We'll come back to that in just a moment. But now that we've talked about thinking, let's talk about reasons versus reasoning. And I want to go ahead for a moment and ask you to think about that. Yes, they're related. They both are cognate. They share that word reason, which is thinking, right? But I have reasons versus reasoning. And the reasons are the things that support an idea. The reasoning is the thinking that gets me to that idea. But it's all part of the reason. It's all a reasoned argument. And you may be sitting there right now saying, Brandon, I know, I get this. I think, yeah, but students use the word reasons all the time and they don't think about what it means. Well, the reason I think this is true is blah, 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 blah. The reason, the piece of support I have for this idea. So we have to have them step back and say, oh, whoa, wait, good. You've got a reason. Now let's talk about that reason and how that fits into your way of thinking. See, they're already doing it. They're bringing it to the table. They know they need reasons for things, but they're not thinking about necessarily how those reasons fit into what they're explaining. So a set of reasons connected through logic and used to reach a conclusion. That's reasoning. Reasons and reasoning are not the same thing. Reasons are the explanations, causes, or justifications. If we were thinking about the Toolman model, I might say that my reasons are my warrants. And there again, warrant is the thing that warrants this conclusion, the thing that warrants this certain understanding. If we say, oh, that's unwarranted, all right, that means there's not a good reason for that. Okay, this is language we don't use so much anymore, and the Toolman model is a different model that people use still, but it's really more about communication than pure rhetoric, or pure logic, but they're related. We think about reasoning as a logical process. And there's that word logic again. There's step by step, and we'll practice that and we'll explore that here in just a few. Connecting reasons, I should say, in a logical way that explains how they lead to an interpretation creates a line of reasoning. Connecting reasons in a logical way, and we'd have to work with our students. What do we mean by logical? What does make sense here? That explains how those reasons lead to a certain interpretation or a certain claim creates a line of reasoning. So everything you all were saying before in the chat, the connections, evidence, claims, explanation, commentary, it's all there. Yes, it's there. So let's talk about this for a second. Here's a claim. School uniforms actually increase inequity and create a troubling atmosphere of uniformity harmful to the development of individuality. Okay, you may agree or disagree with this. These are actual things pulled from actual student papers. Okay, here's reason number one that the student would give for this. Only students with money will be able to buy enough sets to last a week, enough sets of uniforms. Okay. Reason number two, there's no opportunity to express oneself. Okay. Reason number three, students don't learn to think independently around their peers. All right, so these are the three reasons that a student gave to support this claim that uniforms increase inequity and create a troubling atmosphere of uniformity harmful to the development of individuality. So I see a connection automatically between money and buying enough sets to inequity. Cool. I see a connection between expression of oneself up here with uniformity and individuality. I see students don't learn to think independently around their peers. And I see this idea of individuality. Again, I could see that. Okay, now we could get into a lesson here, and this is not what this webinar is about, so I'm not going to get into it right now. But I will mention, yes, there is something to be said here about qualifiers. That's one of the most often ignored parts of the AP language course is the importance of qualifiers, not just in a thesis statement, but throughout. And there's also something about using uniformity with school uniforms. I mean, it's a little clunky, but hey, a student wrote it, timed writing, I'm giving it to them. Well, with this claim and these reasons established, let's look at this a little bit. So here is that thesis again. And you'll see my graphic here in the top. It's a stairway. Well, it's a stairway into the student's mind, and there's steps here. And I think the steps visual metaphor is going to make sense here in just a moment. But what I'm about to show you is going to look dangerously old school. When I say dangerously old school, it's going to look like something that probably a lot of us were asked to do as writers and students ourselves, or that we have asked students to do, maybe to varying levels of success. But what often gets lost is the reason why we're asking students to do it. So let's go ahead and look at three different parts of this claim. School uniforms actually increase inequity. That's one part of the claim. And create a troubling atmosphere of uniformity. Okay, that uniformity is troubling. in this atmosphere, according to this claim. And it is harmful to the development of individuality. All right. So this is an activity that you can do with students and then ask them to start doing on their own, that I promise you will help them better understand line of reasoning and how it tracks throughout their own arguments, whether it be a literary analysis, whether it be analysis of someone else's argument and a rhetorical analysis, or a development of their own argument. So yes, this is like an old school outline, but I want us to talk about and think about what an outline is really doing. So here we have school uniforms actually increase inequity. Under that, we have school supplies one set, students must buy others. Okay. It follows that only students with money will be able to buy enough sets to last a week. Okay. And it follows that students must constantly clean their uniform or wear it dirty. Okay. And then their peers are more likely to notice, tease, and alienate. Wow. Now, you may not agree with all of these. And some of you as teachers and readers and thinkers may be saying to any of these, yeah, but, and that's good. But right now, this is about tracking the